The day Karen fined me for hanging my wet clothes was the same day a bird stole my sandwich. So I should have known the universe was trying to tell me something. I live on a modest patch of land just outside the edge of town, where the lawns are big, the fences are low, and the only HOA in sight was the kind that liked to think guidelines meant law. My house is old school. Wraparound porch, clothesline out back, a coop full of judgmental hens. I dry my laundry under the sun like my grandma did, and never thought much of it until Karen marched up to my gate with a clipboard, a pamphlet, and the kind of smug look you only get from someone who once sued a neighbor over garden gnomes. She handed me a warning slip from the HOA, citing visual disturbances and neighborhood aesthetic violations for hanging laundry outside. Visual disturbances, like my faded work jeans, were personally offending her azaleas. Now, Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-elected head of our HOA, which operated like a discount monarchy where she made up rules faster than the board could print them. She wore white linen like a uniform, hosted weekly brunches for the step-forward wives on her deck, and treated any deviation from her curated catalog life like a federal offense. Her backyard looked like a showroom. Artificial turf, color-coordinated patio furniture, and a fountain shaped like a swan that gurgled like it was dying. I, on the other hand, had tools on the porch, a compost pile, and a lifestyle that made sense. Karen didn't like sense. She liked symmetry. At first, I tried to be civil. I told her the clothesline was my choice, that I wasn't installing a billboard or throwing raves. She patted her hair and said rules were rules. I asked her where in the handbook it said anything about drying socks. She said the handbook was evolving, which is HOA speak for I just made this up and now it's real. Then, 2 days later, I got the official fine, $75 for a first offense, and a note about progressive penalties. I laughed. I shouldn't have. That only made her more determined. The next day, I caught her snapping photos of my towels like they were contraband. So I did what any rational person would do. I built a giant industrial fan. Okay, maybe not right away. First, I ran it to my dog. Then I called my cousin, who's an HVAC tech, and asked how much airflow it would take to dry clothes without a line at all. They laughed, said, probably a wind tunnel, and then casually mentioned an old ventilation unit he'd pulled from a warehouse. It was massive, ugly, and powerful enough to give a haircut if you stood too close. I told him I wanted it. He said I was insane. I said perfect. It arrived 3 days later on a flatbed trailer that looked wildly out of place in our suburban paradise. Karen watched from her window, mouth open, holding a watering can like she was ready to baptize my driveway. I waved. She didn't wave back. I set it up on the edge of my yard, facing directly at her flower beds, and wired it into a custom switch I mounted inside my kitchen. It was technically a drying system, totally legal. Nowhere in the rules did it say I couldn't use wind as long as the clothes weren't visible. The next morning, I hung my laundry in my screened-in back porch, hit the switch, and watched as the fan roared to life like a jet engine. My clothes flapped dry in record time. Karen's azaleas didn't stand a chance. The first gust knocked over 2 patio chairs and sent a table runner flying into the birdbath. I played innocent. When she stomped across the lawn, red-faced and demanding to know what kind of monster points a fan at someone's hydrangeas, I told her I was simply adhering to HOA regulations. No visible clotheslines, after all. The fan was just helping me stay compliant. She threatened another fine. I told her to read the handbook. She stomped away, flip-flops slapping like angry applause. I thought that would be the end of it. One ridiculous rule met with one ridiculous solution. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. No, Karen was the type who'd weaponize a suggestion box if you gave her the chance. She filed a complaint with the board. When that didn't work, she called code enforcement. I got a visit from a bewildered city worker who stared at the fan like it was an alien artifact. I showed him the porch setup, explained my drying system, and offered him lemonade. He shrugged, said he'd seen weirder, and left. Karen wasn't pleased. That night, I heard her muttering to someone on speakerphone about community standards and the war on aesthetics. It had begun that Karen's idea of retaliation came dressed in pastels and delivered by the HOA's newest amendment, which declared that external devices affecting neighboring properties may constitute a violation if used excessively or in a manner deemed disruptive. In other words, they'd written a rule just vague enough to point at me and just caring enough to smell like lilac and control issues. The moment I saw the printed notice stuck to my gate with floral washi tape, I knew she was back on her power trip. The fan, however, was still running. Every day around noon, like clockwork, I flipped the switch, and it fired up with a purr that turned into a roar, sending gusts across the property line and into Karen's manicured sanctuary. Her patio umbrella had taken to doing slow pirouettes. Her string lights trembled like they knew their days were numbered. She retaliated by planting a row of tall potted shrubs in a sad attempt to block the airflow. It didn't work. The fan was mounted on a pivot base I'd rigged up from an old barbecue swivel, so I simply angled it a little higher, and the wind caught the tops of the shrubs like sails. They toppled like dominoes during her weekly garden club brunch, sending cups of lavender tea and mini quiches into a floral-scented tailspin. I watched from my porch, pretending to dust the window while laughing so hard my stomach hurt. But Karen wasn't done. The next day, she hired a landscaper to install a decorative windscreen. He was a kid barely out of high school, and when I offered him $20 and a soda to put it up facing the wrong way, he didn't even ask questions. The screen stayed up for 2 days before it shredded like a paper napkin in a thunderstorm. That's when Karen got serious. One morning, I woke up to find that she'd installed a weather station on her deck, complete with sensors, a live wind feed, and a small camera pointed suspiciously in the direction of my yard. She posted a photo of it online with the caption, "Monitoring microclimate anomalies in suburban zones," which was just her HOA-ified way of saying, "I'm trying to catch my neighbor in the act." I couldn't resist. That afternoon, I printed a giant cardboard cutout of myself holding a laundry basket and stuck it in front of the fan. Then I turned the fan on low and set it spinning slowly back and forth like I was ghost drying clothes on a loop. Karen lost it. She came marching across the lawn, full Karen stride, hair pulled back like she meant business, holding her phone in one hand and a new violation notice in the other. I stayed inside and watched her yell at the cutout for a solid 30 seconds before realizing I wasn't there. The security footage caught it all. By now, the neighborhood was catching on. People started peeking out from behind their blinds when the fan went on. A couple of kids rode their bikes into the breeze just for the thrill of the gust. Someone made a TikTok about the Karen fan war, and within days, I saw a mini version of my setup recreated in a parody video complete with a tiny clothesline and a Barbie doll with a scowl. Karen didn't appreciate her newfound internet fame. Her HOA newsletter the next week was a full page of passive-aggressive bullet points about respectful energy use and visual harmony. Meanwhile, I was getting offers from neighbors to dry their laundry too, for a small fee, of course. I started calling the fan the Wind Spa. It was a hit. Still, I had a feeling Karen wasn't finished. There's something about people like her that can't let go. Control isn't just a habit, it's an identity, and I'd bruised it. That week, she stopped smiling in her driveway. Her morning power walks slowed down to a suspicious crawl past my gate. Her social calendar seemed lighter, the garden brunches quieter. I thought maybe, just maybe, she was finally winding down. I even considered turning the fan off for a day, just to see what happened. But then I noticed something strange. The fence near the back of our properties had fresh dirt piled up along the base, like it had been dug out and tamped back down hastily. My tool shed door was slightly ajar, and one of my extension cords, the heavy-duty, high-voltage kind, was missing. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just filing fines anymore. She was planning something. Something sneaky, something technical, and probably something incredibly stupid. The fan had started a storm, but Karen, as always, was determined to make it personal that I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared. Karen's idea of sabotage probably involved pin arrest and legal pads, but because I was curious. The way a farmer watches the sky when it's too quiet. I set up an extra trail cam near the back fence, the one she thought was out of sight, and angled it toward the dirt pile. I also double-checked the circuit breakers on my fan setup and installed a remote cutoff switch under the porch rail, just in case things went sideways. By morning, the camera had already paid off. At 2:47 a.m., In the grainy black and white footage, there she was, a silhouette in a hoodie, moving with the grace of crab on stilts, dragging a bundle of wires and what looked like a portable battery unit across her pristine lawn. She knelt at the base of the fence, fiddled for 10 minutes, then disappeared back into the shadows. I almost admired the dedication. Almost. Later that afternoon, I tested the fan. It still roared to life, strong as ever, but I noticed a weird flicker in the lights on my porch. I followed the extension cord all the way to the junction box, and there it was, spliced, rerouted, and tapped into by a second, thinner line that snaked underground and tore the fence. Karen had wired herself into my system. Again, except this time, it wasn't about power theft, it was sabotage. She was trying to drain voltage from the fan to weaken it or maybe short it out entirely. What she hadn't counted on was my circuit monitor, which tripped the moment her system started pulling too much. The fan slowed for a second, then surged back with enough force to send leaves flying off her lemon tree. I shut it off before something blew. That night, I didn't retaliate. I strategized. I rewired the entire fan circuit to a decoy power line, one that wouldn't run the fan, but would trigger a hidden set of alarms and a harmless burst of water from the garden sprinkler, aimed precisely where she'd been sneaking in. I also left the real fan line intact, but disconnected it from anything she could access. Then I sat on the porch, thermos in hand, and waited. It didn't take long. At 1:13 a.m., the sprinklers hissed to life, spraying Karen square in the chest as she hunched over the fence like a suburban raccoon. The trail cam caught it all, the yelp, the backpedal, the stumble into her hydrangeas. She retreated soaked, cursing, dragging her soggy cables behind her. In the morning, her patio looked like it had hosted a sprinkler rodeo. But now I had real evidence. I printed stills from the footage and dropped them off anonymously at the next HOA meeting, where Karen had planned to introduce yet another motion banning external noise-generating units from neighborhood yards. Her little slideshow was cut short when a board member flipped through the photos, frowned, and asked if she'd been trespassing again. She tried to deny it, of course, said the photos were edited, that someone was setting her up. But this time no one bought it. One board member muttered something about third strike, and another whispered that her term was almost up anyway. By the end of the meeting, Karen looked less like a queen and more like a dethroned prom chaperone. Her newsletter didn't go out that week. Instead, the HOA inbox got flooded with memes. One had Karen's shocked face under the caption, "When the fan hits the fan." I thought we were done. Truly. But then came the storm. A real one. A summer squall rolled through, knocking out power across half the neighborhood. Tree limbs down, cables fried, the works. I spent the day cleaning up branches and checking on the hens, while the fan sat unplugged and silent under a tarp. That's when I got a knock at the door. Not Karen this time, a utility worker with a clipboard. He said they tracked an irregular surge from a backfeed that led straight to her property. Said someone had tried to draw power from a neighbor's system after the grid went down. Said that neighbor was me. I showed him the footage, the water-sprayed sabotage attempt, the clipped lines. He shook his head, said this was one for the records, and promised to report it. 3 days later, I heard the sheriff's cruiser pull into Karen's driveway. I didn't gawk, but I didn't look away either. He was polite. He didn't arrest her. Just had a long talk while she stood there barefoot in a designer robe, arms crossed, lips trembling. By the time he left, her husband had come out to unplug the weather station. Her potted shrubs were moved back to the garage. And the fan? I installed a fresh plaque on the frame. In loving memory of HOA Rule 17.3. May it rest in gust. I never turned it on again. Didn't have to. Karen put her house up for sale 2 weeks later. The listing photos didn't show the backyard. Probably for the best. Sometimes peace comes not with thunder, but with the quiet whir of justice in motion, and maybe a bit of well-aimed wind.